Yo, welcome to the story. Sit with me for a minute, breathe, and tell me one thing. Where are you watching from? I want to see the map of our hearts in the comments, for real, because this ain't just content, this is confession. This is the kind of night where truth walks barefoot across broken glass and don't even flinch, and I'm gonna talk to you like a man talks to himself when the lights are off and the house remembers every voice that ever raised, every plate that ever shattered. So hear me right now. 'Cause I ain't hiding from this, not tonight, not ever again. See, dinner was supposed to be peace. Right, the kind of basic little ritual that keeps a family stitched together when the world pulls at every seam, but peace left before the napkins even unfolded, and my daughter, she looked at me like I was a mistake somebody forgot to delete, said it fast and sharp like a slap wrapped in silk. Dad, don't eat here, you embarrass me, and I swear the room changed temperature. The air shrunk, my chest felt like a locked door with somebody kicking from the inside, and I didn't say nothing back. 'Cause I learned long ago the loudest person ain't always the strongest, sometimes silence is the only soldier that don't betray you, so I stood up slow, like the table was a witness and I didn't want to spook it, took my plate, walked through that living room that still smelled like last Christmas, into the kitchen where the tile is colder than forgiveness, and I ate alone. Fork by fork, old man bites, steady hands hiding the tremble, and I told myself the same lie men tell when their hearts bruise. It's nothing, she's just stressed, let it slide, be a river. But the river inside me was already flooding, and I could feel the dam cracking, and somewhere between bite 2 and bite whatever, I saw it papers, half hidden under a dish towel like a shame blanket, phone unlocked. Screen lit up with messages that weren't meant to be seen by the daylight, names I recognized and names I didn't, plans that tasted like smoke and money, and my blood heated up in a way that felt like teenage anger trapped inside old bones, because this wasn't teenage drama, this was grown trouble carved in neat little bullet points and heart emojis, and I realized this kitchen wasn't just where I came to be small, it was where she came to be reckless, where she built a second life with lies dressed in pretty clothes, and I froze. No, I didn't freeze, I steadied like a man before the storm, a boxer hearing the bell and telling his bones to remember, and I started reading, not nosy reading, survival reading, father reading, the kind where every line pulls at the thread of the future till the whole sweater goes shapeless, and there it was, proof stacked like dominoes, the parties, the late night meetups, the story about the internship that was just a smokescreen for a thing that could eat her whole, the messages that talked about my house like it wasn't ours, like it was a wallet with windows, like I was a joke with a mortgage. And let me tell you something raw, love is fragile, but a father's duty ain't. It's iron when it needs to be, it's soft when it can be, and it's a blade when there's no other way to cut the rope, and I felt the blade inside me wake up, not out of revenge, but out of protection, out of that old school vow we make without saying the words, I will not let the world ruin my child even if she thinks I'm the villain in the first act. So I took pictures, I took notes. I mapped the story like a detective whose badge is a dead tired heart, and I thought about the first time she laughed, first time she said daddy with peanut butter on her chin, first time she fell and looked for me before she looked for the ground, and how did we get here? To a table where love went quiet and pride got loud, to a kitchen where the ghost of my wife's cinnamon coffee still lingers but the present smells like secrets and cheap perfume, and I wanted to scream, but I didn't, I swallowed the scream like fire and let it burn clean, because rage is messy and truth is surgical, and this needed a steady hand, not a broken bottle, so I waited, like the moon waits for the tide, and when she walked in, face hot with that ugly little satisfaction, I saw a kid pretending to be a storm, and it broke me in a way I didn't think I could still break, and I said her name, not sharp, not soft, just steady, the way steady can scare you more than shouting, and I told her to sit, and for the first time that night, the table remembered how to be a table, it wanted to be useful, wanted to hold something that mattered, and I laid the papers down and watched her brave face forget what bravery is supposed to look like, watched the text bubbles on that phone grow heavy as bricks, watched her eyes beg the clock to go backwards, and I didn't gloat, I didn't preach, I didn't play the cheap soundtrack of I Told You So, because this ain't victory, this is triage, This is a father grabbing the wheel before the car meets the guardrail, and I told her straight, "You hurt me, but I'm not here to hurt you back. I'm here to stop you from building a life that will collapse on your chest and call it love. I'm here to shut the door on anybody who thinks my daughter is a ladder. And if you think I embarrass you now, baby, wait till you see how embarrassment looks when the whole city is watching you drown, because that's the path you're standing on, and I won't let you take another step, not while I'm breathing." And something in her face cracked, not opened, and the toughest kid I know remembered she wasn't strong enough to hate me, not for long, and her hands shook like little birds and she whispered that sorry we say when pride is still in the room, and I told her pride could stay, but lies had to leave, and we negotiated with the truth like it was a landlord and we were two tenants behind on rent, and I said names, called numbers, blocked lines, cut cords, dragged the mess into the sunlight, and I did it with a calm that scared even me, because that's the thing about fathers, we turn into architects when our kids start building dangerous houses, we bring rulers and hammers and mercy, and we tear down what needs tearing down, even if the dust stings our eyes and the neighbors talk. And when it was done, the kitchen changed temperature again, warmer this time, like the house was thanking us for telling the truth, and she cried. And I didn't pick the tears up off the floor, I let them sit. They're like rain that had work to do, and I told her I loved her, told her I would never be her enemy, but I would always be her wall, and walls don't smile when they stop a storm, they just stand, and she nodded, a small nod that still felt like sunrise, and for the first time that night, I ate, not because I was hungry, but because ritual is medicine, and the fork felt less heavy, and I didn't ask for respect, I took responsibility, and respect walked in behind it, quiet like a blessing, and if you're hearing me right now, understand this, I made her regret every single word she said, not with cruelty, not with punishment, but with the kind of truth that tastes bitter and saves your life, the kind that turns a daughter back into a girl who knows home ain't a place you leave just 'cause shame said so, it's the place where shame gets cleaned, and we sat there, father and daughter, in a house that felt new 'cause the lies got evicted, and I realized something that'll stay with me till the last light goes out. I ain't here to be liked, I'm here to love, and love is work, and work is holy when it keeps your child from drowning in pretty phrases and ugly decisions. And the night didn't apologize, but it did get softer, and I put the papers away, the messages deleted, the threats blocked, the plans rerouted, and the kitchen breathed, and the table remembered our names, and somewhere beyond the windows the future cleared its throat and asked us if we were ready to listen. I didn't sleep, nah, I sat in that kitchen like the tiles were a courtroom and the fridge was humming a guilty verdict, watching the glow under the door where she slept too light to be innocent, and I made a promise to the old man inside me who still remembers how to raise a roof and guard a name, that we weren't letting those vultures pluck my daughter clean, not today, not ever. So when morning cracked open like a bruised peach and the house smelled like burnt toast and last night's words, I went quiet and sharp, called numbers I wasn't supposed to have and listened to voices that smiled without saying hello, the kind that makes a father's blood turn to iron, and I kept my tone steady, the way you talk when you already know the truth but you want to see if the lie can keep a straight face, and sure enough, they were slick, calling her family without knowing what that word costs, calling my house the spot like our living room was a lobby in a bad movie, asking if I was chill, if I was on board, like I was the valet for their little empire, so I told them I was the wall, and walls don't do consent, walls do boundaries, and the silence that followed sounded like a coward putting on shoes, and that's when I realized the game wasn't just dirty, it was bored, it was predictable, it was a bunch of thin hearts trying to make themselves thick by chewing on girls who don't know that wolves say bestie now, so I printed screenshots and stacked receipts like bricks, and I waited for her, waited for that brave face to come downstairs and sip her coffee like innocence, and when she did, her eyes flickered at the papers like they had teeth, she didn't reach, didn't touch, just froze the way deer do when the road gets loud, and I told her we were about to make some calls, about to mop up this mess with names and light, and she shook her head, soft at first, then hard, telling me she had it under control, telling me I was overreacting, telling me the same lullaby People sing when they're halfway through sleeping on a knife, and I didn't raise my voice. No use yelling at a storm, you gotta build for the weather. So I slid her the phone, numbers highlighted, messages circled, and I gave her the choice a father gives when love means dragging truth into daylight. You can call with me, or you can watch me call, but either way this ends now. And something about the word now made her chest hitch, because now meant no more excuses, no more little performances with big consequences. Now meant we turn the lights on and see who's still brave when nothing's glamorous. So she nodded, tiny, like a leaf agreeing with wind, and we hit dial on the first one, the ringleader, the polished fly with good cologne and rotten breath, and he answered like a snake pretending to be velour, all smooth concern and brother talk, calling me sir like respect was a coupon, telling me he's always looked out for her, telling me I've got him wrong, and I said his name slow. Then said mine faster, told him this house has a spine and a memory, told him the kitchen record's footprints and it saw his, told him the receipts don't lie even when pretty mouths do, and when he tried to flip it, tried to paint me controlling, jealous, old school, I leaned in and told him old school built the house he's been circling, old school made sure there was dinner on the table the night my daughter decided shame was louder than love, old school is why there's a father standing here today. And he went quiet, not honest quiet, predator quiet, the kind that scans exits, and I cut him off at the ankles, told him we're done, told him the numbers are blocked, told him if he makes one more shadow near her life, we bring the sun and the law, we bring names and witnesses, we bring the part of me that doesn't do warnings twice, and I hung up before he could smear more sugar on the poison. Then we called the others, the entourage of empty hands, the girls who call chaos freedom, the dudes who think a night out is a campaign to strip a girl of her good sense, and I didn't care about apologies. I wanted separation, clean, immediate, and I got it, not because they were scared of me, but because cowards are allergic to fathers who stand. And as each line went dead, I watched my daughter's face change temperature, watched pride sweat and shame breathe and relief try to find a chair to sit in. And I told her we weren't done, not by a long shot, because the hardest part ain't blocking numbers, it's blocking narratives, the ones inside your head that make trash look like romance, that turn hunger into swagger, that make you forget home is a lighthouse, not a prison. So we sat with the mess like two surgeons after the cut, checking for bleeding, checking for infection, and I asked her the question fathers ask when the room is honest, what are you chasing that ain't chasing you back? And she crumbled and strutted in the same breath, telling me about loneliness wearing glitter, telling me about the whisper that says you ain't enough unless somebody dangerous says you are, telling me about the way shame edits your memory so the kitchen looks small and the street looks big, and I felt more than sadness, I felt a map, a route she took to end up at the table where love went quiet, and I realized we gotta reroute with tenderness and steel, both. Because softness alone won't hold when the wolves send flowers, and hardness alone won't heal when the mirror needs mercy. So I told her we're gonna rebuild the week like it's a house, gave her curfews that were actually curfews, gave her budgets that were actually bridges, gave her passwords that were actually prayers, and I promised I'd walk her through every exit she thought was an entrance, and she rolled her eyes 'cause kids are kids, but beneath the roll was a flicker, a gratitude she didn't want me to see, and that's fine. Fathers learn to read the weather, not the headline. So I kept going, reaching out to her real friends, the quiet ones with day jobs and nervous laughter, brought them into the living room and made tea nobody wanted but everybody drank, told them to watch her like a choir, not a crowd, told them to make noise when the road gets slippery, told them to keep me looped into the songs. And then I did the thing that felt like swallowing nails. I called her mother's sister, the aunt who only shows up when drama can be turned into theater. But theater has lights and we needed them, and when she came through, she came correct for once, looked my daughter in the face and named the danger in plain English, told her, baby, fairy tales are out of fashion, but hustlers still wear crowns, and you ate a pawn, you ate a purse, you ate a +1, you're the headline, act like it. And I watched my kid absorb it like medicine she didn't like the taste of but needed, watched her spine remember it has a job, And somewhere in that long afternoon where phones stayed quiet and doors stayed loud, I felt the kitchen finally release me, like it swallowed my pride to save me and now it could spit me back out whole. And I took a long breath that tasted like dust and victory, small victory, not parade victory, housekeeping victory, the kind that matters. And I told her we'd face the fallout together, told her every step from here is a step away from wolves and a step toward windows, told her the people who use you will always say you owe them, but the people who love you will always give without counting. And she cried again, less rain, more river, and she said a sorry that had bones this time, a sorry that stood up on its own, and I never made her repeat it. I just held the door open to tomorrow and locked the one behind her, and when night came back with its black jacket and its streetlights blinking like tired eyes, I felt no fear, because the house had learned our names again, the table had found its purpose, the kitchen had kept our secrets and then turned them into truth, and somewhere out there those friends were hunting for softer targets. That's their nature, but they won't circle here no more, not while I'm breathing, not while this roof remembers, not while love is a verb and protection ain't negotiable. And I wiped the counter slow like a ritual, and I looked at my daughter, and she looked at me back, not like a judge, not like a stranger, but like a soldier who finally understood the war ain't against her father, it's against the silence that lets wolves write her story. Night slid back in like it forgot something and came looking for it, and I sat with the house quiet enough to hear the old pipes gossip, thinking about the way lies move the soft shoes, loud consequences, and how today we cut them off at the ankles but tomorrow they'll try new doors. So I walked the rooms like a parole officer with a rosary, touching the frames, checking the locks, breathing deep, and the living room felt smaller now that it wasn't hiding a parade of shadows, but the quiet wasn't peace yet, it was a pause, a breath between punches, and I knew wolves don't retire, they regroup, they call cousins with new names and old appetites. So I went back to the kitchen, the confession booth with a sink, and opened the drawer where we keep things that make order out of chaos's pens, tape, ghost receipts, and found a folded notebook I swore I didn't remember buying, black cover, soft enough to feel like it belonged to someone who believed in secrets more than salvation, and I opened it. Slow because paper has teeth when the truth is written in ink, and page 1 was my daughter's handwriting, messy and beautiful like a heart trying to sign its own contract, talking about the first time shame felt like a dress that fit, talking about a boy with a smile that looked like a door, talking about how she started measuring her worth in glances and exits, and I read it with that father hurt that don't bleed out, it just turns to steel and vows, and she said she hates the sound of forks scraping plates because it reminds her of all the dinners where love sounded like chores, and my bones got heavy because that was my fault as much as the world's, the way a man can turn survival into a schedule and forget the music, forget the sweetness, forget to set the table like it's an altar, and I wanted to rip the page to stop the truth from being alive, but that's coward work and I ain't built for that, so I kept reading, turned to a section where she wrote names and drew little crowns next to people who didn't deserve to be royalties in her mind, a map of a kingdom of nothing, places that smell like cheap sugar and big promises, and then, lower, in a smaller script like confession needs less space, she wrote about missing her mother with a hunger that no church could feed, about how grief is a roommate that never pays rent, how the nights got louder after the funeral, how she started chasing noise to keep the quiet from making sense, and I closed my eyes because the world took my wife and that wound still drips sometimes, and here's our girl trying to plug it with glitter, trying to learn joy from mouths that only know the price of everything and the value of nothing, and I felt the necessary kind of anger, the kind that polishes your hands till they can hold a problem without shaking, and I whispered a promise to the dark, told it I will not let her drown in a well I dug by accident, not while my hands can build stairs, not while my voice can call the sun, so I wrote notes on post-its like a field medic making a plan, new dinners with laughter, old stories told right, music on low, forgiveness on high, and I stuck them around the house where only we would see them, tiny prayers disguised as tasks, light the candle, call the aunt only when the truth needs a witness, schedule the therapist who treats hearts like gardens, not machines, and I talked to the ghost of my wife like husbands do when the house leans. Told her I'm trying, told her I messed up. Told her I'm learning that fatherhood is alchemy, turning regret into recipes, turning silence into sentences that don't stab. And while I was cataloging hope like a librarian of second chances, the phone buzzed with a number we hadn't blocked, a local code, a voice I never met but recognized like a bad song, low and smooth, asking if my daughter could come out for one last talk, calling me big guy, calling her little star. And my whole chest became a courtroom, judge and gavel, and I said her name, asked her if this was one of them. And she nodded with that look that says I want to believe, but believing got expensive, and I told her the truth with teeth. Love is a verb, and verbs move, but manipulation is a costume that fits too many bodies, and we don't do curtain calls here no more, we do exits, we do locks, we do clean air. And the voice on the other end tried a different song, tried fear, said things would get messy if we didn't show up, said he knew where she worked, knew who her friends were, and I laughed a kind of laugh that don't need humor, just history. And I told him mess is what fathers mop, I told him threats are what men turn into paperwork and consequences, and I told him we're done auditioning for his cheap drama, and then I hung up because dignity likes short calls, and my daughter looked at me like she'd just learned a new language, the grammar of boundaries, the poetry of saying no with a full voice, and I told her we still gotta be smart, because wolves don't weep when you refuse them. They watch, they wait, and then they find softer fences, so we documented everything, turned screenshots into a file that could stand up in daylight, called a friend who knows the law, the real kind, not the TV kind, and laid out our case, calm and unafraid, and I felt the house get taller, like it was standing on its own name. And later, when the street hummed with cars that don't know our story, I stood by her door and told her a secret I should have told years ago. I'm scared too, not of the world exactly, but of failing you, of being a man who makes a roof and forgets to make a home. And she opened the door like she was letting me into a country, and she said she's scared of being ordinary and ignored, scared of becoming a footnote in someone else's loud life. And I told her that loud ain't the same as legendary, that ordinary is where real love lives when it's tired of performing. And we stood in that little hallway where the paint chips and the memories don't, and we chose each other again, without speeches, without anything but the kind of quiet that says yes. And then I went back to the kitchen and pulled out a shoebox I keep under the old cookbooks, inside it letters from the woman who taught me kindness and thunder, her handwriting a river, her sentences a map, and I read one to my daughter about patience that looks like laziness but is actually bravery in disguise, and we let it sit inside us. This note from the dark with truth that bites and then heals. And as the night stretched longer, I took down the calendar and drew circles around days we'd fill with simple rituals: Tuesday pancakes, Thursday walks, Sunday calls to the cousin who never lies. And I told her the only way to beat the performance culture is to make a life so real it embarrasses the lie. And she smiled, small but honest, and said she could try. And I said trying is the whole song. We just need to sing it until the chorus feels like home. And somewhere out there the men with slick voices were picking new numbers, finding new girls, because that's their industry. But here we were, building an economy of truth, paying each other in attention and mercy, and the house listened, liked what it heard, stood a little taller in its old wood, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel embarrassed at a table. I felt necessary, and necessity is a crown men forget they own when the world tells them usefulness is corny. So I polished it subtle, and I set it down soft, and the night, finally, closed its eyes. Morning came in sideways, like light trying to sneak past the heavy things we said, and I poured coffee that didn't fix a damn thing but held my hands like they were worth holding, and I told myself quiet is a tool, not a punishment, so I sharpened it, sat on the edge of the couch where springs remember every argument, and thought about my father, the man who taught me that silence ain't surrender, it's a weapon when the world gets loud and stupid. And I heard him in my chest, telling me to control the room without controlling the person, to make weather without thunder when thunder scares the wrong hearts. And I stood up with that old school posture that says we're building something today, not a monument, not a sentence, but a path, and I called for her, gentle but firm, because fear don't come when love knocks like water, it comes when you pound like a cop, and she came down slow, hoodie, socks, face doing that brave but raw thing kids do when last night is still shaking inside them, and I asked her if she slept, and she shrugged, and I nodded because that's the language we speak now, the dialect of almost, and I told her we're gonna make a circle, not a prison, a circle like grandmothers used to make when stories were medicine, and we're gonna sit in it, and we're gonna name the storms, and we're gonna break them, not with fists or flex, but with rules that kiss and rules that bite, both. And she looked at me with that question that kids hide behind their eyes, do you think I'm weak? And I said no, baby, I think you're unfinished, like the rest of us, an unfinished ain't a flaw, it's a blessing if you keep building, and I felt the ghost of my father nod behind me, because men who survive long enough to become elders know the difference between broken and becoming. So we sat at the table that once made me small and now felt like a tool in my pocket, and I laid out the plan like a mechanic pulling clean wrenches from a stained drawer, simple, hard, tender. We clean the phone, we clean the calendar, we clean the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, and we put boundaries where wolves hate to see them, and we put softness where shame tries to starve us, and we do it out loud so there's no shadow work to be misread by fear. And she coughed up a laugh that sounded like a rusty hinge, and I took it, because laughter that fights ain't the enemy, it's just proof that humor's survived, and we made a list, handwritten, sloppy, alive, of the storms. We're breaking loneliness dressed like glitter, validation on layaway, the myth that independence means isolation, the lie that fathers are furniture, and I wrote honor in big letters like it needed room. Because honor isn't a word teens post, it's a practice you hold till it becomes the way your hands work, and then we did the hard part, the part men forget matters more than speeches, we practiced, right there in the living room. I pretended to be the slick voice with polite threats, and she told me no with breath, not just mouth, told me no with eyes that didn't apologize, told me no with posture, and we did it again, because repetition is how muscle gets trained and boundaries become reflex, and I saw the storm crack a little, not defeated, but surprised, like it finally met a house with windows that don't underprice themselves, and we kept going till the coffee went cold and the list went warm with fingerprints, and that's when life tried a new angle, a knock at the door that sounded like it belonged to a neighbor but wore the scent of trouble, and I opened it to a boy in clean sneakers with a mouth that knew how to smile on command, ring in his voice like backup dancers just off frame, and he asked for my daughter with the respect shape but not the respect substance, and I told him she's busy becoming, not available for deconstruction, and he switched lanes into humble, said he came to apologize, said he brought flowers, said he wanted closure, and I said closure ain't a performance, closure is a paperwork you fill out inside yourself, and the kitchen don't host your theater, and he tried to make me the villain, painted me controlling, old, jealous of youth, and I stood there with my father's shadow behind me and my daughter's breath beside me and said I'm jealous of nothing, I've seen everything you think is rare, and the price tag is printed in blood, and he flinched because truth don't need volume to slap. And I told him we don't do friendly exits for people who lit matches in our house, we do firm doors, and I closed it like a pastor ending service, common final, and my daughter watched from the hallway, learned something about endings that don't beg, and she relaxed a muscle I didn't know was tense, and we went back to the circle, back to the wrenches, and I pulled out the shoebox of letters again, showed her the one where her grandmother wrote about storms that think they own the ocean, and how the ocean laughs and keeps moving, and we kept moving, into chores that felt like rituals, into playlists that skipped the songs that smell like clubs and kept the ones that sound like Sunday kitchens where love is butter and everybody eats, and I cooked badly because grief messed with my recipes, but she ate like she was tasting a memory that didn't hurt for once, and I told her breaking storms ain't glamorous, it's boring, it's consistent, it's brushing your teeth and your soul twice a day even when nobody claps, and she asked me if being a man is just lifting heavy things quietly, and I said being a man is noticing who needs you and making sure your quiet is strong enough to hold their noise, and she said that sounded like poetry with work boots, and I said that's the only kind I trust, and then afternoon folded into a text from a number we didn't recognize that tried kindness like a costume, invited her to a networking mixer, offered opportunities, used words that smell like conference rooms and taste like scamming, and we flagged it, documented it, deleted it, and we called one more friend who got burned by that crowd last year, listened to her tell the story without turning it into entertainment, took notes on the tactics, added them to the storm list, and I felt the house stand taller again, because the structure of a home ain't wood alone, it's choices that keep the roof honest, and as the light softened into evening, I pulled a chair to the porch and taught her the old man ritual of seeing, just sitting, and letting the neighborhood write its own poem across your eyes, and we named what we saw an uncle laughing at his own joke, a kid dragging a scooter like a tired dragon, a woman carrying groceries like hope, and I told her this is the economy real people trade in, not likes, not fake status, just the ordinary currency of attention, and she said maybe ordinary is exactly the rebellion, and I said exactly, and we made a pact to be rebels in small ways, to honor the floor we stand on and the names we speak and the boring jobs that pay for the apples, and we shook on it like two bosses. And then I told her a secret I learned too late: silence is a son you've gotta raise right, or it turns into a bully, and she asked how, and I said you teach silence to serve intimacy, not shame, you teach it to protect, not conceal, you teach it to listen, not erase, and I realized I was talking to myself as much as to her, because I'd used silence to dodge love when love required speaking, and that's how tables turn cold, and I promised to break that storm in me too, right there, that minute, and I did, by saying the thing men bury: I'm proud of you for staying, for learning, for letting me help, and she cried soft like an apology running out of reasons to stay angry, and I didn't fix it, I held it, because holding is what breaks storms the quiet way, and the night tiptoed in without drama, and for the first time in a long time, our house didn't brace, it exhaled, and I stood in the doorframe like a bridge, father, son of silence, breaker of storms, and I felt the kingdom of nothing crumble somewhere far from here, and the kingdom of enough settle into our living room like a blessing that knows your first and middle name. It started like any regular evening that pretends it ain't holding a test behind its back, the kind of quiet that feels earned and a little scared of its own shadow, and I was in the kitchen doing my slow man cleaning like the sponge was a ritual and the counter was a confession booth, thinking maybe we turned a corner, maybe the wolves finally got bored of trying our door, but that's when the past knocked through the future like a rude guest, not with a fist, but with information, because truth doesn't always arrive loud, sometimes it slips under the threshold like cool air, and I felt it before the phone buzzed, the weight of something that wants to be known, and the screen lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize that wasn't threatening, wasn't sweet, just steady, a screenshot, no caption, a calendar, and a map and a photo of my daughter with a crowd I thought we buried, and my chest didn't explode, it tightened, like a belt on a story that was eating too much fiction, and I called her slow, gave the house a chance to breathe, said her name with the kind of calm that makes storm clouds sit down, and she came into the light with her hair tied back and that face that used to wear a mask so well it fooled even me. But tonight her mask forgot the script, tonight her mask couldn't lie, because her eyes showed me the raw page, the one where the ink runs, and she said before I asked, she said she made a mistake, said she went out yesterday just to talk. Said it was daytime and she thought that meant safety, said a friend tagged along who turned out not to be a friend, and she cried without tears, that dry cry people do when their pride is trying to keep dignity from dissolving. And I didn't raise my voice 'cause men who love don't use thunder to fix glass, they use patience that bites a little, and I told her the thing nobody likes hearing: daylight don't cleanse lies, it just wears sunglasses, and she flinched, not at the words, at herself, at the version that still thinks the mask can negotiate with the wolf, and I walked her through the screenshot like a medic showing where the wound is, pointed at the calendar event that wasn't what it claimed, at the map pin that leads to a lounge painted as a studio, at the photo timestamp that betrayed the promise of just an hour, and her mouth opened and closed like a door with a broken hinge, and she said she didn't do anything she'd regret, said she kept the distance, said she didn't drink, said she remembered the list, and I believed the part of her that wants to stay home for real, and I held the part of her that still thinks performance pays better than patience, and we sat in the living room like it was a courtroom we built together, the coffee table our bench, the late light our witness, and I told her something uglier than anger. I'm disappointed, not in you alone, in me. In the way I let silence raise you when words were needed, in the way I made dinner matter but forgot to make conversation matter more, and she took that hit not like blame, but like medicine that stings to heal, and she said she's tired of being the girl who needs a wall to stand, wants to be her own foundation, and I said yes to that with both hands and my whole chest, but foundations get poured, measured, cured, they don't show up to mixers in heels and hope the floor respects them, and we both laughed at the metaphor 'cause humor is a life jacket when the water knows your name, and I asked her to hand me the phone, and she did, no hesitation, and we opened the group thread she didn't leave, scrolled the theater, the yo pull up, the we got plans, the baby girl you're special, the this is family, and I took a breath, the old man kind, and I typed like a firefighter puts down tape, she's done, don't call, don't invite, don't threaten, if you try any flavor of pressure, we will file, we will show receipts, we will say names in rooms where names matter. And then I blocked them with a rhythm that felt church, felt final, felt like closing a casket on the version of our life that liked drama too much to cook the rice, and she watched me like I was narrating a movie she needed to star in soon, and she asked how to make that kind of no without me at her shoulder, and I taught her the sentence I learned late, no is a complete prayer when the altar is your dignity, and she wrote it down on paper like spells live better on trees. And I saw the mask fall, not shatter, fall, the way something falls when it's tired of wearing your face without paying rent, and behind it was a girl who needs more than rules, she needs a life that sings, needs a story that feeds, needs a table that blesses, and I promised to build it again, not from scratch, from memory, from the kind of memory that tastes like cinnamon and sundae, from the recipes your mother swore fixed any room, and I pulled down the old skillet that sticks when you rush, and I cooked slow and bad and heartfelt, and she ate slow and good and healed, and we layered the night with little rituals that embarrass wolves, board games that ain't cool, playlists that hum like home, stories about her grandmother's stubborn joy, tea with too much honey because sweet is cheap and necessary sometimes, and halfway through laughing at a joke that wasn't funny but was generous, the doorbell rang. A polite little ring that always means impolite business, and I opened it because men who guard don't flinch at thresholds, and there she was, the friend who tagged along, the one whose loyalty is a costume rented by the hour, speaking softly, saying she just wanted to check in, saying she ain't like them, saying she cares, and my daughter stood behind me like a choir that learned the hymn, and I let the girl talk till her words felt heavy with their own weight. Then I asked her one question you can't dodge. Why did you bring her to a room that eats girls and calls it networking? And her face did the thing masks do when oxygen gets expensive. It twitched, it reached for the script, and then it forgot it, because the night makes liars clumsy when the room is humble and the witness is the truth. And she stammered, she spun, she tried to make me the old man who hates movement, and I smiled because moving ain't the issue, being moved like furniture in someone else's show is. And I said we're done, not just with them, with you as a bridge to rooms that don't deserve her feet, and my daughter didn't gloat, she didn't spit, she didn't perform victory, she said thank you for showing me, and closed the door with respect like a ceremony, and we went back to the table and finished the kind of meal that repairs more than hunger, and I told her the truth that bites, every mask has an expiration date, and tonight yours did what grace does when it's tired of pretending, it fell. And I'm proud of the face underneath, not because it's perfect, because it's honest, and honesty is the only makeup that doesn't smear when the night sweats, and she laughs soft like a dawn that don't need trumpets, and she asked if I'm really okay with being the wall forever, and I said I'd rather be the window when you learn how to lock your own doors, but until then, I'll be brick and apology and backbone, and she put her forehead on mine like we were building a bridge with bone, and I felt my father in the room. Felt my wife in the sugar, felt the house remember our names again, And the phone stayed quiet like it had manners now, and the streets did their neon ballet without inviting us to audition, and somewhere out there the wolves found easier prey because that's their diet. But here, in this little square of light where love got domestic and legendary in the same breath, the mask lay on the floor, harmless, and the face that mattered learned to breathe without it, learned to say no without shaking, learned to pick yes like fruit, learned to sit at a table that doesn't embarrass a father for eating in his own house, and I cleaned the skillet slow, and I blessed the doorway. Quiet, and I told the night thank you for leaving us alone, and it did, or maybe we did, by closing the audition and opening a home.
The pantry was always the quiet heart of the house, small and squared off, smelling like cinnamon and old patience. A place where sugar waits for birthdays and rice waits for ordinary. And I didn't step in there looking for ghosts. I stepped in looking for a jar of honey to fix a throat that had been preaching too long. But the door creaked in that way that makes the past clear its throat, and I felt it. Something hiding that didn't belong to food. Something paper-heavy, story-stiff, and I moved. The flour like it was a curtain, slid the cereal like it was a clock, and there they were. Envelopes, rubber-banded, squatting like secrets that learned to sit quiet. And I told myself not to jump to horror. Told myself maybe this was just receipts for grocery runs I forgot to count. But the first envelope didn't smell like tomatoes and milk. It smelled like neon and a lie in a suit. And when I opened it, the world didn't scream. It sighed, a stack of printed payment confirmations, transactions. At places we blocked, charges under names I didn't recognize, little fees with big meanings. And every line was a breadcrumb in an alley that don't get sunlight. And I whispered her name because fathers pray by calling the person they love to the doorway of truth. And she came fast, ponytail messy, eyes calm in the way that means panic is hiding behind a decent poker face. And I laid the stack on the pantry shelf like an altar. And she swallowed the kind of swallow that costs, said she thought. She deleted all that. Said she thought clearing the phone cleared the life. And I told her phones are just mirrors. They don't burn the house down. The house burns when we believe the mirror more than the living room. And we pulled every envelope, every batch of transactions, and the truth showed us it had a system. Monthly charges that were subscriptions for a ghost brand studio, consultation. Fees that were tickets to a performance called humiliation, a donation, to a fundraiser that looked noble and was actually a pipeline for their party money. And I felt the pantry tilt, felt the shelves get heavy with the weight of the narrative. They'd been siphoning, quietly, using her name like a key card, her hope like a wallet, and my mistake like gasoline. Because I hadn't checked the pantry for ghosts, I'd just stocked it with optimism and gone to sleep. And she kept saying sorry in that way that runs out of new words after the third one. And I took her hand, told her sorry as a broom. We got a sweep, and sweeping means calling banks, calling names, calling rooms until the echo turns into a voice that answers. So we got to work, right there between the pasta and the tea, father and daughter doing clerical combat against a machine that wore nice fonts and smelled like cologne. And I dialed, and the first customer service voice tried to float us with platitudes, tried to bury us in wait times and the myth of policy. And I said their policy meets my duty today, and I held, and I documented, and I told them this wasn't buyer's remorse. This was predation with a smile. And we escalated until a supervisor got on the line with a tone that recognized the shape of a man who refuses to hang up. And we got 3 charges reversed, small, but real. And that felt like cleaning the first corner of a room that's been hoarding shame. And we kept going, envelope by envelope, receipt by receipt. And she started seeing the pattern the way you see constellations once you know where to look. The same names, the same tactics, the same opportunities with tiny fees that add up to a tax on hope. And she got angry. Not the dramatic kind, the surgical kind. The anger that tightens the grip on the pen and writes letters to places that prefer you stay quiet. And I told her anger is fine if it builds, not burns. And we built a case, a file so thick the pantry air felt smarter just breathing near it. And while the printer crawled through pages, my memory crawled through grief, back to the night my wife taught me that kitchens aren't just for feeding bodies. They feed a kind of discipline that saves you when the world sells shortcuts. And I felt her in the corners, the way good women stay after the calendar says they left, and I talked to her in my chest, told her we're fixing what negligence let in, told her our girl's learning the algebra of no, told her the pantry is a witness and we needed it to testify. And right then the doorbell rang polite like it learned manners this week. But the shadow behind it was familiar. The boy with clean sneakers and a mouth that rehearses apologies like monologues. This time holding a piece of paper instead of flowers, something that looked official and smelled like theater. And he said he was just delivering it. Said it wasn't his idea. Said he's just the messenger. And I took it without letting him breathe our air too deep. And the paper tried to look like a formal notice from their studio. A request for final payment, and a threat of reputational review. And I laughed the kind of laugh that makes the hallway brighter because it tells the dark it won't get rent today. And I told them reputations are built by acts, not invoices. And our act right now is closure. And I closed the door with a father's signature. Gentle, firm, final. And I brought the paper to the pantry and laid it beside the file like a bad actor trying to crash an honest movie. And my daughter was ready, chin lifted, pen steady. And she wrote the response we needed, precise, calm, naming dates, naming reversals, naming the law we'd cite if necessary. And we sent it, and the kitchen exhaled, and the pantry stopped creaking, and somewhere deep inside the wood, a ghost had to pack a suitcase. And I told her this right here is what adulthood looks like when you strip it of romance. You audit your life, you audit your relationships, you audit your pantry, and you put receipts in a box that says we learned and we moved. And she said it feels like war, and I said it is, but it's a boring war, and that's the good kind, the kind that ends with sleep. And she asked if we're safe now. And I told her safety ain't a status. It's maintenance. It's sweeping the same floor every day till your feet forget where the dirt used to be. And we kept sweeping, calling the last bank, sending the last email, blocking the last auxiliary number. And by late afternoon, the file looked like a small book, the kind that never wins awards but saves lives quietly. And we set it on the top pantry shelf next to the candles and the storm radio. Because some emergencies don't come with rain. They come with men in suits using friendly nouns. And we ate early, simple, greedy for ordinary. And the food tasted like a victory that refuses to dance. And that's fine, because dancing can wait, but sleeping can't. And after dishes, we sat on the floor with the shoebox of letters and found one that felt heartbeat accurate for tonight. My wife writing about the day she learned to keep envelopes. Of joy too, not just bills, tiny lists of blessings tucked into the pantry, so the house remembers its own kindness. And we made one, scribbled it silly. Reverse charges, clean boundaries, the sound of my daughter laughing at the stupid pun I still won't stop using, the porch light working, the neighbor's kid drawing chalk suns. And we tucked it beside the ugly envelopes, because you don't erase shadows, you crowd them with light. And the phone stayed quiet except for a text from one of the Real friends, the girl with day job hands and honest eyes, saying she's bringing over a cake tomorrow for no reason. And I told my daughter that no reason is the best reason. And she smiled like the kitchen had finally forgiven us for making it host our storms. And we checked locks. Not out of fear, out of habit. And we stood in the pantry one last time, looking at shelves that had held secrets and now held tools. And she whispered, almost embarrassed, that she's proud of me. And I said, I'm proud of us. And I said it like a benediction. and something in the air stopped shaking, and we went to sleep to the sound of a house that believes in us again. And if you ask me what a ghost truly is, I'll say it's a story that refuses to be told all the way. And tonight we told it, line by line, and it gave us back the room. Shame came back like it forgot its keys, knocking on the bones, whispering through vents, trying to rename the house with that cheap graffiti voice that says you ain't enough without the crowd. And I felt it before the day even cracked open. The way the air gets thick with old scripts, and I told myself out loud that shame don't own my address. Not today, not ever again. And I put coffee on with the kind of stubborn you can taste, thinking about how names stick to people like stickers you gotta peel slow. And maybe I'd worn the wrong ones for too long. Quiet, embarrassing, burden. Names that don't belong to a man who builds walls and windows with both hands. And my daughter shuffled in, hoodie and tired eyes, and I saw it on her face too. The residue of yesterday's receipts, and those polite threats dressed in fonts. And I said her name like a blessing and a challenge. Told her we got one job today. Rename the room. Rename the rhythm. Rename the story. And she breathed out like truth. Cost money. And we started small, because big speeches don't fix floors, rituals do. So I turned on music low, Sunday kitchen volume, and set out 2 plates even when hunger felt shy. And we ate quiet like honesty takes energy, and I told her the simple version of a hard fact. Shame learned our names from silence and performance. It memorized us when we went mute or tried to act rich in rooms that sell debt. So we break it by speaking and by keeping things ordinary. And she said, ordinary feels cheap. And I said, cheap is the lie. Ordinary is the wealth. Ordinary is a crown if you wear it right. And somewhere inside that soft conversation, a new name began to hum, not out loud, inside the house's bones. And we decided to clean with intent, not just dust, but the kind of clean that changes the way a room thinks. Old flyers off the fridge, those events that always end with someone crying into a mirror, gone. Business cards from strangers who call manipulation mentorship, gone. Playlists that smell like neon regret, gone. Numbers for people who sell favors, gone. And we replaced them with the church of small. Sticky notes with recipes that taste like memory. A calendar of boring joy, walks, pancakes, calling the cousin who don't lie. And while we were renaming the walls, a message slid in from that studio. New tone, new tactic, pretending to be compassionate, pretending to be concerned about her future, offering mediation like they were saints with clipboards, and my daughter looked at me like a student who remembers the test now, and I smiled the kind of smile that says there's power in saying no without violin music. And we drafted the response quick and clean, naming that we don't do any version of their theater, that future isn't built in rooms that monetize vulnerability, that mediation is a myth when the only thing that needs negotiating is their exit. And we sent it, blocked it, filed it, breathed. And then real life knocked, a neighbor who don't know our saga but knows the weather, asking if we could help carry a box of books to her car. And we did, because service is a renaming too. And in that small lift, I felt shame slide off my shoulders like a coat I never liked, but wore for winters that weren't mine. And my daughter laughed with the neighbor about some silly title on a cover. And that was the holy part, the part where you feel regular on purpose. And I swear the house grew a new inch in its spine. And when we came back, a friend texted, the honest one with day job hands, asking if she could stop by with the for no reason cake. And I said yes like the word could be a door. And in the hour before she came, my daughter found a note she'd written to herself months ago, folded and hidden under a candle, a little prayer in shaky pen that said, don't be invisible in your own story. And I held it, and I felt that old shame try to twist it into a joke. And I refused. I gave it back to her like a medal, told her this ain't corny. This ain't cringe. This is the architecture of becoming. And the doorbell rang, and cake arrived, and we ate it like sugar was a vote, and the friend stayed and didn't make content out of our pain. She just asked about the porch light, the chalk suns, the ordinary. And that's when the phone lit up again with a number we didn't know, pretending to be safety, offering security consultations with a discount code. And my daughter smirked, because it's wild how capitalism can smell drama and sell umbrellas for fires, and we blocked it without ceremony, went back to cake, and talked dreams like they were chores, school applications, side gigs that build skill without selling soul, the kind of work that puts you to bed instead of sending you out to chase applause you don't want. And after she left, the house got softer, a good kind of quiet, the quiet where names can be spoken without shaking. And we pulled out the shoebox of letters and found one about names. My wife writing to me when I was young and stupid, telling me the world will try to rename you with its convenience, call you customer, content, consumer, call you old, call you square, call you whatever keeps you buying, and that your only defense is a name you choose and live by. And I felt her like a lighthouse under my sternum, and I decided, right there, that shame don't get the deed, that we rename what it tried to claim. So I stood in the hallway and said my name out loud, first and last, said father like a rank, said man like a duty, said guardian like a prayer. And it felt less corny than the world wants you to think. It felt necessary, and my daughter did her version, said her name, said student, said artist, said enough. And in the saying we built a small fence around the day, and the night came on light-footed, and before it settled, one last test. A DM from the friend who tagged along. The masked girl, writing a long apology that curved around responsibility like a river around a stone, saying she didn't mean harm, saying she's a victim too, asking for one more chance. And my daughter froze, because the urge to forgive even the wrong thing is baked into good hearts. And I told her forgiveness is holy but access is strategic, and she nodded, typed a firm no that didn't invent extra sentences to soften the truth, and she sent it without crying. And I hugged her like men do when words would break the spell. Then we lit a candle for no reason except naming the house a home again. And we sat. And I told her the most useful thing I learned too late. Shame will keep trying to learn your name. We'll keep sending invoices for identity, but you can change your name every morning if you must. Not the letters, the meaning, and every choice paints it on the beams. And she said maybe tomorrow her name can include brave. And I said brave is just consistent small courage. And she laughed with the good kind of tired. And we did the bedtime ritual that renames you without telling the world. Check doors, check heart, check the photo of her mother, smiling like stubborn joy and unsent warnings. And we kissed the frame like fools who believe in magnesium miracles. And the night didn't send another test. Or maybe it did, and we didn't hear it because we chose our names louder. And I went to sleep with the taste of sugar and spine. And if you ask me how a man changes the name shame gave him, I'll tell you in plain poor poet English. You cook boring dinners. You block fancy demons. You carry your neighbor's books. You teach your kid to say no. And mean it. You say your name out loud like you mean it. And you live so ordinary the lie gets embarrassed and leaves without even slamming the door. The house had a rhythm now, like a living thing that learned to breathe without panicking. But some breaths carry ghosts, and tonight one of those breaths rattled the windows and woke the floorboards, and I felt it in my chest before I heard it, that low hum of a secret trying to stretch its legs. So I walked the hall slow, palms on the banister like a man checking his pulse. And the house answered with the small noises of a place that remembers every laugh and every lie. And I thought we were done with surprises. Thought the pantry and the phone and the receipts had been the last of the wolves' tricks. But houses keep things. They hoard the small betrayals like coins in a jar. And tonight the jar clinked. I found it behind the old heater in the attic, a shoebox taped up with the kind of care that says someone wanted the past to stay polite and hidden. And when I opened it, the air changed. Old photographs, letters in my wife's handwriting, a stack of envelopes with names I hadn't seen in years, and a tiny flash drive taped to the bottom like a heart waiting to be found. My hands shook, not from fear but from the weight of history. Because you don't just find a flash drive in your attic. You find a time capsule that could either bury you or set you free. And I thought about the nights we'd sat at this very table, her laughing with coffee on her lip, me thinking the world was simple enough to be fixed with pancakes and patience. And now the world had folded itself into a small rectangle of plastic and metal and secrets. I didn't plug it in right away. That's not how men who've learned caution act. We don't rush to light the fuse. We hold it up to the sun and look for the smoke. So I carried the box downstairs like a relic, set it on the counter where the light hits the grain just right, and called my daughter in without making it sound like an interrogation. Because this was her house too, and secrets that breathe in the attic belong to everyone who sleeps under the roof. She came down with that hoodie and that look that says she's been through a war and is still choosing to be human. And when I told her what I found, she didn't flinch. She just sat, like she'd been waiting for the house to cough up its truth. And that made my chest ache in a way that felt like both pride and apology. We opened the letters first. Old love notes between my wife and a man whose name I recognized like a bruise. A name I'd seen in the margins of bills and in the background of a photo at a funeral. A man who'd once been close enough to be family and distant enough to be dangerous. And the letters were tender and messy and full of a life I never knew she carried in secret. The kind of life that explains why she left and why she stayed. And my daughter read them like someone reading a map to a place she'd never visited. And I watched her face change as if the letters were a mirror, and she was seeing a version of her mother that didn't fit the frame we'd kept on the mantel. Then we found the receipts, hotel names, dates that matched nights I'd been out working, charges that made my stomach drop because they painted a picture of a woman trying to buy time with a stranger's company. And I felt the old anger rise. The kind that wants to point and shout and make the past pay for its silence. But I swallowed it because anger is a blunt instrument, and this needed a scalpel. The flash drive was last, taped under a folded recipe card like a secret ingredient. And when I plugged it into my laptop, the screen lit up with files named in a way that made my throat close. Videos, voice notes, a folder labeled with my daughter's nickname. And for a second, the house seemed to hold its breath with me, like it knew the moment would change the air. The videos were messy, raw, recorded in dim rooms and bright cars, people laughing too loud, promises being made and broken in the same breath. And there was my daughter in one of them, younger, softer, talking about wanting to be seen, wanting to be chosen for something real, and my heart did that old flip where you feel both proud and terrified, because seeing her younger self was like watching a photograph move and breathe and remind you of what you almost lost. But there were other files too, conversations between men who used charm like currency, plans that smelled like exploitation, names of places that matched the receipts in the pantry, and a voice note that made my blood run cold. A man laughing about how easy it is to get girls to sign up for opportunities when you dress the trap in mentorship. I listened to it twice, then 3 times, not because I wanted to, but because fathers learn to listen to the parts of the world that try to eat their kids. And the more I listened, the more the house seemed to lean in, like it was finally ready to cough up the rest of the truth. My daughter sat there, hands folded, eyes dry, and I realized she'd been carrying a secret too. The shame of being used, the guilt of thinking she'd chosen wrong, the fear that her mistakes would define her forever. And I wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but I know better than to promise the weather. So I told her this instead. We'll make it right, not because the world owes us, but because we owe ourselves the work of cleaning up the mess. We made a plan right there on the counter, the kind of plan that's part legal, part moral, part domestic. We'd document everything. We'd go to the people who could make the predators uncomfortable. We'd call the banks, the platforms, the places that hide behind policies and polite language, and we'd bring the light. But there was another choice sitting heavy in the room. The flash drive could be a weapon, a way to ruin reputations and make people pay. And I felt the old hunger for revenge stir like a coiled thing. Because when someone tries to eat your child, you want to feed them back to the wolves. But I also felt the weight of what revenge does, how it stains you, how it teaches your kid that the world is a place where you answer hurt with hurt. And I didn't want that for her. So I chose a different kind of violence, the violence of truth. We'd use the files to protect, not to punish, to build a case that would make the predators think twice, to make the platforms close accounts and the banks reverse charges, to make the people who profit from pain find their business models inconvenient. We started with the smallest things, screenshots, timestamps, cross-references, and the house watched us like a jury. And as we worked the attic's secrets into a file that could stand in daylight, something else happened. The house began to breathe easier, like it was relieved to be honest at last. My daughter cried then, not the dry cry, but the kind that cleanses, and she said she was sorry for hiding, for being ashamed, for thinking she had to carry the whole story alone, and I told her to stop apologizing for surviving, because survival ain't a sin, it's a skill, and we'd teach her how to use it without losing herself. We burned the letters. No, not burned. We read them aloud and then put them in a box for history, because erasing memory ain't the same as healing, and the house seemed to approve, like it wanted the past respected but not worshipped. Night came and the streetlights painted the living room in long, honest lines, and I sat on the couch with the flash drive in my pocket like a loaded coin, and I thought about the next move. Who to call first, which names to say out loud, which doors to knock on, and I felt the old man in me steady, the one who knows how to be both soft and hard, both patient and relentless. The house hummed, keeping our secrets breathing but no longer letting them suffocate us. And I realized something true and ugly and beautiful. A home that keeps secrets can also be the place that teaches you how to exhale, if you're brave enough to open the attic and face what's been living in the dark. I turned to my daughter and said we'd sleep on it, that tomorrow we'd start the work that makes predators uncomfortable and makes the honest people proud. And she nodded, forehead against mine like a pact, and the house settled around us like a promise, not a prison, and somewhere beyond the windows the city kept its own secrets. But in our square of light we decided to make truth louder than shame, and that felt like the first step toward a morning that might actually be ours. Regret showed up like a guest who knows the house better than you do, slipping through the back door with muddy shoes and a grin that says it's been waiting, and I felt it in the bones first, that slow, cold recognition that the choices we made for love sometimes come back with interest and compound interest and a bill you can't cash. So I sat on the edge of the bed where the light from the street lamp draws a line like a judge's pen, and I let the memory play like a bad movie on repeat. The dinner, the hiss, the kitchen, the receipts, the attic, the flash drive, all of it folding into a single frame where my daughter's face is the only honest thing left, and everything else is a set of props pretending to be life. And I thought about how regret ain't dramatic. It's surgical, it doesn't scream, it cuts clean and leaves you with a shape you can't ignore, and I ran my thumb along that shape like a man trying to read a map he drew wrong. And the house around me breathed slow, like it was learning to forgive the noise it had been holding for years. But forgiveness don't erase the ledger. It just teaches you how to balance it. So I stood up and walked the rooms like a man checking his own pulse, touching frames, touching the table where we ate and where we learned to be small, And I thought about the first time I felt ashamed to be seen with my daughter, how that small humiliation lodged in my chest and grew roots, how I let it teach me to be quieter than I needed to be, how I let silence raise a wall between us that the wolves could climb. And that's the cruel math of regret. You subtract time and add consequences, and the result is a life that looks like a stranger's. And I didn't want that for us, not after everything. So I decided to do the only thing regret respects: work, steady, boring, relentless work that turns the mirror into a tool instead of a weapon. And I started with the small things because big things are just a stack of small things done right. I fixed the porch light that had been flickering like a bad mood. I replaced the burned-out bulb in the hallway that made shadows look like they had opinions. I cleaned the pantry and put the file of receipts on the shelf where we could see it and not be haunted by it. And each small repair felt like a promise I could keep. And promises are the currency regret respects when it wants to be paid back, not with drama, but with consistency. And my daughter watched me do it with that look that says, she's learning how to trust a man who used to be a ghost in his own house. And that's the thing about regret. It wants you to believe you're finished, but you ain't finished until you choose to be. And choosing is a muscle you build by doing the same small hard things until they become habit. So we made a list, not a list of punishments, but a list of rituals. Tuesday pancakes, Thursday walks. Sunday calls to the aunt who tells the truth without dressing it up. And we stuck the list on the fridge, like a treaty, and every time I walked past it I felt the mirror get a little less sharp, like the reflection was learning to be kinder because we were being kinder to ourselves. And kindness is a strange weapon against regret because it doesn't fight, it rebuilds. And rebuilding is the only revenge that doesn't stain your hands. I called the people who needed calling, not to shout but to document, to make the predators uncomfortable with light and paperwork, because regret loves secrecy and the only way to starve it is to make the room bright. And my daughter sat with me while I made those calls, her hand in mine like a lifeline, and she learned the grammar of boundaries, how to say no without apology, how to block without guilt, how to choose friends who bring bread, not knives. And watching her learn, that felt like watching a sunrise I'd earned with sweat, not luck. We went through the flash drive together, not to punish, but to protect. And we made copies and timestamps and a file that could stand in daylight. And I felt the old hunger for revenge flare up when I saw the men's voices on those recordings, the way they laughed about girls like they were inventory. But I swallowed it because I didn't want my daughter to learn that the answer to being hurt is to hurt back. I wanted her to learn that the answer is to build a life that makes predators irrelevant. And that takes patience and paperwork and the kind of boring courage that shows up when the cameras are off. Regret taught me another lesson too, that apologies are cheap if they're only words. So I started saying the things I'd been too proud to say. Sorry for the nights I was absent. Sorry for the dinners I let become chores. Sorry for the silence that taught you to hide. And I said them without theatrics, just plain sentences that landed like bricks. And she heard them and didn't throw them back at me like weapons. She kept them like seeds. And I watched her plant them with small acts, letting me cook, letting me mess up a recipe and laugh about it, letting me sit in the passenger seat while she drove us to the park and told me about classes and plans and the kind of dreams that don't need permission. And those small acts were the stitches that regret can't cut through, because stitches are made of choices and choices are harder to undo than words. Night came and we sat on the porch and I told her stories about her mother, the ones that didn't make the obituary, the ones that made the kitchen smell like cinnamon and stubbornness. And she laughed and cried in the same breath, and I felt the mirror in my hand soften. Like regret was a thing you could hold and study and then set down, not a monster that lives under the bed. And she said something that hit me like a bell. Dad, I don't want to be defined by what they did to me. I want to be defined by what we do now. And that sentence was a clean cut in the best way. It separated the past from the future like a seamstress cutting away the ragged edge, and I promised her then, out loud, that we'd keep cutting away the ragged edges until the garment fit, until the life fit, until the mirror showed a face that knew how to forgive but also how to guard. And that's the paradox of regret. It teaches you humility if you let it. It teaches you vigilance if you're smart. And it teaches you tenderness if you're brave enough to be tender after being hurt. I thought about the men who thought they could use our girl like a tool, and I felt a cold satisfaction not of revenge, but of justice in motion. Because we'd turned their theater into paperwork and their whispers into evidence, and the platforms that let them hide had to answer to light. And light is the only thing regret fears, because regret needs shadow to survive. And we were making the house a place of light, not because we wanted to be seen by the world, but because we wanted to be honest with ourselves. By the time the moon slid over the roof and the streetlights blinked like tired eyes, the house felt different, not fixed, never fixed, but honest. And honesty is the only kind of repair that lasts. And I lay down that night with my daughter's voice in my head saying she wanted to be defined by what we do now. And I felt the mirror in my hand like a tool, not a weapon, and I knew regret would come back sometimes. That's its nature. But now when it comes, it'll find a house that answers with work, and light, and a daughter who knows how to say no. And that's enough for tonight. Enough to sleep on. Enough to wake up to. And if regret is a mirror that cuts clean, then let it cut away what needs cutting and leave the rest for us to build with our hands. The night we thought would close the book on everything only opened the last chapter. And I learned quick that forgiveness don't come cheap in this city. It costs time, it costs truth, and sometimes it costs the kind of pride you wore like armor until you realize armor rusts if you never polish it. So we sat at the table that had seen our worst and our work. My daughter across from me with that look that used to be all storm and now had a little sunrise in it. And we talked like people who'd been in the ring and decided to stop trading blows and start trading plans. And the first thing we did was name the damage out loud, not to punish but to map it, because you can't fix what you won't point at. And we pointed at everything. The receipts, the messages, the men who sold mentorship like a mask, the friends who trafficked her loneliness for clout, the silence that let it all grow like mold in the corners, and saying it made it smaller, like when you turn on the light and the monster in. The closet is just a coat on a hanger, and she cried, not the kind that begs for rescue, but the kind that clears the throat of the soul. And I held her hand like a man who finally learned how to be present without being performative. And we made a list of what forgiveness would look like if we were honest. Accountability from the people who hurt her, restitution where possible, boundaries that were legal and emotional, therapy that wasn't a checkbox but a practice, community that shows up, without cameras, and a slow rebuild of trust that doesn't rush like a cheap romance. And we wrote it down in a notebook that smelled like coffee and second chances, and taped it to the fridge like a treaty. The city outside kept doing its loud thing, sirens, late-night laughter, the hum of neon. But inside our square of light, we did the boring holy work. We called lawyers who didn't wear suits like costumes. We filed complaints that turned whispers into paperwork. We sent the files from the attic to people who could make predators uncomfortable. And I watched my daughter learn how to be a witness, how to speak facts without letting shame narrate the sentences. And that was the real victory, not the legal wins that came later, but the way she stood straighter when she said dates and names, the way her voice stopped apologizing for existing. And I felt proud in a way that didn't need applause, just the quiet nod of a man who knows he did the right thing even when it cost him his comfort. There were nights the city pushed back, threats thin as paper, DMs that tried to gaslight us into silence, a smear campaign that smelled like desperation. But we had built a fortress of ordinary things, friends who showed up with casseroles and not cameras, neighbors who kept an eye without gossip, an aunt who told the truth like a medicine, and a therapist who taught my daughter how to hold her story without letting it hold her. And those small things were the mortar that kept the house standing when the storms tried to make it fall. Forgiveness came in pieces. A public apology from one of the men after the platform closed his account and the bank reversed charges. A quiet text from a girl who'd been part of the crowd saying she was sorry and that she'd been scared to speak up. A court date that ended with a settlement that didn't make headlines but made our bills lighter, and each piece felt like a coin dropped into a jar labeled repair, and we counted them slow, grateful for the small currency of accountability. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the public stuff. It was the private ledger we kept between us. The nights my daughter woke up and the old fear sat on her chest like a heavy cat. The mornings she flinched at a knock. The afternoons when a song would pull her back into a room she'd left. And I learned to be patient in a way that felt like training for sainthood, showing up for the small triggers, the microtherapies. A text at noon that said, "Thinking of you." A walk around the block. When the city felt loud. A playlist of songs that didn't smell like clubs. A stupid dad joke that made her roll her eyes and then laugh. And those tiny stitches turned into a seam that held. We also had to forgive each other. Me for the years I let silence raise a wall between us. Her for the way she tried to fix a hole with glitter and bad company. And forgiveness there was messy, not cinematic. It was a series of small acts. Me admitting I'd been scared to be the dad who shows up too hard. Her admitting she'd been ashamed to ask for help. And both of us agreeing to be clumsy and honest, and to keep trying even when the old scripts wanted to take over. The city taught us another lesson. People will try to monetize your pain. They'll sell you quick fixes and call them mentorship. They'll dress predators in suits and call them opportunity. And the only antidote is community that cares without cameras, laws that are enforced, and a family that chooses repair over revenge. And we chose repair. Not because revenge is weak, but because revenge teaches the next generation that violence is currency. And I didn't want my daughter to inherit that. Economy. There were moments of grace. Neighbors bringing over a cake for no reason. The cousin who showed up with a job lead that paid steady and honest. The little kid next door drawing suns on the sidewalk that made my daughter smile, like she'd seen sunlight for the first time in months. And those moments stacked up like proof that the world still had good in it if you looked for it. And we looked. Months later, when the legal dust settled and the predators found new prey elsewhere, the house felt different. Not because the city changed, but because we had changed inside it. The table that once made me small now held our rituals. The pantry kept receipts and also recipes. The attic still had its ghosts, but we'd learned to open the box and read the past without letting it write our future. And my daughter, she started school again. Took a job that paid her dignity. Started a small art project that made her laugh. And sometimes she'd come home and put her head on my shoulder and say, "We did it, Dad." And I'd say, "Nah, you did it." Because that's the truth. She did the hard work of staying, of learning to say no, of choosing herself. And I was just the guy who refused to let the wolves have the house. Forgiveness, I learned, is a currency you earn by paying attention, by doing the boring things that keep people safe, by teaching your kid to be a witness and a builder, not a victim or a performer. And it's expensive because it asks for time and truth and the willingness to be small and brave at the same time. But it's worth every cent. The last scene of our story wasn't a parade or a miracle. It was a Tuesday night with pancakes on the stove, a playlist of songs that smelled like home, a neighbor's kid banging on the door to show us a drawing, and my daughter laughing at my terrible flip of an omelet. And in that ordinary noise, I felt the city soften, like it recognized a house that had learned how to keep its own. And I knew then that forgiveness had done its work, not by erasing the past, but by teaching us how to live with it, how to guard the future, and how to make sure the next kid who walks through our door finds a table that feeds them and a father who eats with them without shame.